The worst decision of my life was to agree to go on one last family vacation before telling our kids we were getting divorced. When this happened, I had already decided to leave Darien after years of feeling ignored and slowly erased in my own home. The separation was my decision, and I had accepted that it would hurt, but I believed it was the healthiest choice for our children in the long run. When I told him I wanted a divorce, he reacted in a way that confused me because he did not shout or beg. He just listened and spoke in a controlled tone about timing and responsibility. A few days later, he brought up the mountain trip we had planned months earlier, and he insisted that canceling it would punish the kids for something that was not their fault. He repeated that we could separate after the vacation and that we would tell the children gently step by step so they would not feel like their world collapsed in one day. I hesitated because something about his calm persistence felt forced, but I agreed because I did not want my children to lose that trip along with everything else. The cabin was isolated and surrounded by trees, and once we arrived, the silence felt heavier than I expected because there was no nearby houses and no phone signal. The first day passed without obvious problems, and Darien acted almost cheerful as he helped unpack and cooked dinner. That night, after the kids were asleep, he sat with me in the kitchen and started talking about fixing our marriage as if my decision was temporary. I told him clearly that I was done, and although I stayed calm, I noticed the way he studied my face while I spoke. He leaned back in his chair and said that being away from the city would give us time to think without distractions, and he emphasized that isolation could be good for us. The way he said that made me uneasy, but I told myself I was overreacting and that this week would simply be uncomfortable. The next morning, he suggested a hike, and after we returned, I saw him lock the door and check the windows carefully, which felt unnecessary but not alarming. I went into the bedroom to unpack the last bag, and that was when everything shifted. On the bed, there was a duffel bag left open, and inside, I saw thick rope, rolls of duct tape, and a metal bat placed neatly on top. My heart began racing, but I forced myself to breathe slowly. When he appeared in the doorway, he saw exactly what I had found. Instead of denying anything, he closed the door behind him and locked it. And he told me in a low voice that I was not supposed to see that yet. I asked him what the bag was for, and he walked toward me with a calm expression. We were not ending this family because you had decided to give up. When I tried to move past him, he grabbed my wrist and twisted it sharply. He pushed me onto the bed and used his weight to hold me down, and even though I struggled and tried to roll away, he tied my wrist tightly behind my back and secured my ankles. He kept repeating that this was temporary and that he just needed time to make me understand. He taped my mouth shut and dragged me into the living room where my kids froze when they saw me tied up on the floor. They started crying immediately, asking what was going on, and he told them that mommy was confused and needed help remembering what mattered. He forced them onto the floor and tied their wrists while they begged him to stop, and he did it with the same focus he had shown in the bedroom. There was a pause after he finished tying them, and in that silence he stood still, breathing slowly as if considering his next step. That pause filled the room with a tension so strong that I could hear my own pulse in my ears. He removed the tape from my mouth and ordered me to tell the children that I was not leaving him. And when I refused, he slapped me hard enough to knock my head against the table leg. The kid screamed, and he picked up the bat and struck the wall, cracking the plaster to show that he was serious. He pressed the bat against my throat while explaining that divorce destroys families and that he was saving us from a mistake. I could see in his eyes that this was not about love. It was about control, and that realization terrified me more than the weapon in his hands. After a while, he untied my wrist but left my ankles bound, saying that we would talk like adults while the children watched, which made the situation feel even more twisted. I forced myself to speak calmly and asked him to loosen the ropes on the because they were too tight. He hesitated for a second, and that small hesitation gave me a narrow opening. When he bent down to adjust my daughter's rope, I lifted both legs and kicked him as hard as I could in the side of his head. He fell against the coffee table, and I rolled off the chair and dragged my bound wrist against a sharp edge of broken plaster until the rope started to tear my skin, and it then finally began to fray. He recovered quickly and grabbed my ankle, pulling me backward while shouting that I was ruining everything. I twisted and drove my elbow into his throat, then bit his wrist when he tried to cover my mouth, and although he punched me in the side of the head, I kept moving because stopping meant giving him control again. I freed one hand and crawled to my working at the with fingers that felt slow but determined. He lunged toward me, but I kicked his knee hard enough to make him stumble, and I managed to eye both children. I told them clearly to run to the door and not look back, and their faces showed real fear now, not confusion. The front door was locked, and my hands slipped on the knob while I searched for the keys, and I could hear his footsteps getting closer behind us. I grabbed the keys from the hook, dropped them once, and picked them up again while my son cried that he was coming. He slammed into me from behind and pushed me against the wall, knocking the air out of my lungs, and then pulled my hair to drag me away from the door. I blocked his raised fist with my forearm, drove my knee upward to create space, ignoring the sharp pain in my arm. I twisted free and reached the keys first, then ran outside shouting at the kids to get into the car and lock the doors. He tackled me on the gravel before I could reach the driver's side, and we hit the ground hard while he tried to pry the keys from my hand. I swung my arm and the metal key cut across his cheek, and when he tried to pin my arm, I kicked him repeatedly in the stomach until he loosened his grip. I scrambled up, unlocked the car, pushed the kids inside, and locked the doors behind me. He stood in front of the car for a second, staring at me with an expression that felt empty of empathy, and then he stepped aside with a strange smile that made it clear he was not finished. I started the engine and drove down the dirt road as fast as I could. At the gas station, an employee saw the broken window and our injuries and called the police while I explained what had happened in a voice that did not feel like my own. Officers later found Darian trapped with a broken leg, and he tried to claim that I had attacked him first. However, the ropes in the cabin and the marks on our wrist told a different story, and he was arrested that same night. He is now in prison, and my children and I live in a small apartment far from those mountains. Sometimes I realize how close we came to not making it out of that highway alive. Josh Powell was the main suspect in the 2009 disappearance of his wife, Susan Powell, who vanished from their home in Utah under suspicious circumstances. Their marriage had been deteriorating, and there were reports of controlling behavior and increasing tension before she disappeared in 2012. During a court-ordered supervised visitation with his 2 sons in Washington state, Powell locked the social worker out of the house, attacked the with a hatchet, and then set the house on fire, taking his and both. When your best friend shows up at your door in the middle of the night and says he needs to leave the city right now, you understand that whatever is happening is already bigger than a simple trip. This happened a few years ago. I knew Ray most of my life. We grew up together, shared plans, trusted each other without question. Months before the trip, he started acting different in a way that was hard to ignore. He avoided crowds, installed extra locks, and kept checking behind him like someone might be following. I tried to help him seek psychological assistance, as his episodes of paranoia only worsened over time. After not speaking with Ray for a while, when we saw each other again, he seemed to have left his problems behind. But one night he showed up at my apartment looking exhausted and desperate. He said he needed to leave the city immediately because staying there was destroying his mind. He told me he could not explain everything yet, but he needed me with him because I was the only person he trusted completely. I thought he was overwhelmed and needed a break, so I agreed to travel with him to a quiet coastal city. I believed a short vacation might calm him down. Honestly, with everything Ray had been through in recent years, it didn't seem like a bad idea to grant his request and take a break. After all, that's what friends are for. I did not understand that he was not planning to rest. We went to a small town far away from the city, which I won't name for safety reasons. I'll just say that it was very peaceful and surrounded by nature. The hotel was small and calm, the kind of place where nothing dramatic ever happens. I expected Ray to relax once we arrived, but instead he became more tense. He kept the curtains closed, refused housekeeping, and moved furniture near the door at night. That really surprised me. I thought I was doing the right thing by coming here with him. On the second evening, he finally explained what he believed was happening. He said he had joined a private group months earlier, something presented as a professional circle that later revealed strict rules and secret meetings. A lodging house. According to him, once you gave your word to them, Walking away was not allowed. I told him that stress and isolation can distort perception, and I suggested we return home and look for professional help. This time, for real. He reacted sharply and insisted this was not anxiety, but a real threat. He said people connected to the group had been watching him for months. He admitted that the trip was not a vacation, but an attempt to disappear for a while, hide from the lodge. He asked me to trust him and stay until things settled. I agreed, although I was convinced he needed medical help, not distance. The day he vanished felt forced from the start, like we were pretending everything was fine. We had coffee at a bar near the harbor, and although the place was quiet, he kept scanning the room. I tried to keep the conversation normal, but he barely responded and kept checking his phone. That afternoon, he insisted on walking alone because he felt trapped inside the hotel. I offered to join him, but he refused and promised to return before dinner. I watched him leave and told myself giving him space might help. But 9 that night, he had not returned, and his phone went straight to voicemail. I searched the nearby streets, checked the bar again, and asked strangers if they had seen him. Nobody had. When I got back to the hotel, our door was slightly open. I stopped several steps away and listened, trying to decide whether Ray had returned or whether someone else was inside. The hallway was empty and silent. I pushed the door open and stepped in. 3 men stood in the middle of the room wearing long dark robes and smooth masks that covered their faces completely. They did not move quickly or speak loudly, and their calm posture made it clear they were not surprised to see me. One of them closed the door behind me while others stayed still. They said they were looking for Ray and that he had obligations he failed to complete. Their tone was controlled, but there was no room for negotiation. I told them they were mistaken, but one of them grabbed my arm firmly and another pulled out a cloth with a sharp chemical smell. I understood immediately that they were not there to talk. They forced me toward the wall and pressed the cloth against my face while I struggled to pull away. I held my breath and tried to twist free, but they coordinated their movements. My shoulder hit the wall hard and pain shot down my arm. While fighting to stay conscious, I reached toward the nightstand and felt the emergency button we had noticed earlier. I slammed it repeatedly until a loud alarm filled the room. The sudden noise disrupted them long enough for me to break free. I ran toward the balcony, climbed over the railing, and dropped to the balcony below. The fall hurt badly and left me disoriented, but I forced myself up and ran down the emergency stairs. I did not stop until I reached the street and blended into a small group of people. I stayed awake all night in a diner, trying to process what had happened. By morning, I returned to the hotel and saw police cars outside. A crowd had gathered near the back entrance. On the pavement below the upper floors, I saw a covered body. Even before anyone confirmed it, I knew it was Ray. The police told me he had fallen from a high level during the night. They said there were no signs of forced entry and that security footage showed no one entering or leaving our floor except me. According to the records, Ray had never left the building after we returned from coffee. That detail did not match what I experienced, but I had no proof. The room showed no signs of struggle. There was no alarm record, no visible damage, nothing that supported my story. They found a strange note on his laptop filled with references and coded phrases. The case was labeled undetermined, but the tone of the investigation suggested they believed he jumped after an episode of paranoia. I stood there knowing something had happened inside that building that would never be officially acknowledged. After returning home, I tried to resume normal life, but the memory of those masked men stayed clear in my mind. I avoided discussing the trip in detail and focused on routine. Even simple noises in my apartment started to feel significant. One evening, I came home and found an envelope on my kitchen table. There was no stamp and no return address, which meant someone had entered or had access to my space. I opened it carefully and found a photo of my parents' house taken from across the street. Under the photo was a short typed message that said, "We'll come for you." I reported the letter to the police, but they treated it as a possible prank. I warned my parents without giving them full details because I did not want to alarm them unnecessarily. Deep down, I understood that whatever Ray had feared was not over. After that letter, I stopped pretending I could live a normal life. I left my apartment within a week and did not tell anyone where I was going, not even my parents. Since then, I have moved from city to city, renting small places under short contracts, paying in cash when I can, and never staying long enough to feel settled. I avoid routines, change gyms, switch grocery stores, and never walk the same route twice, because the idea of being predictable feels like handing them a map to find me. I travel light now, with one suitcase that stays half-packed at all times, ready for the next move if something feels wrong. When I sit in cafes, I choose seats facing the entrance, and when someone holds eye contact for too long, I leave without finishing my drink. I do not know if they are actually watching or if fear has reshaped my habits permanently, but the difference no longer matters because my life is built around the possibility that they are patient and organized. Years have passed and Ray's case remains unresolved, discussed online as a mystery with no clear answers, but for me, it never ended. I stopped expecting closure a long time ago, and I already know that the truth doesn't need to be public to be real. That's how it ends for me, with no answers, no justice, just running away. Ray Riviera died in 2006 after falling from the historic Belvedere Hotel in Baltimore under circumstances that remain deeply unsettling. He disappeared after receiving a sudden phone call, and days later, his body was found in a conference room below a hole in the roof. What intensified the mystery was a strange cryptic note taped behind the computer, filled with references to secret societies, Freemasonry, and coded language that investigators struggled to interpret. The causes of his death remain mysterious.
We didn't expect anything. We just wanted one weekend away from everything. We arrived late afternoon, we set up camp like it was nothing. The tent was too small, the firewood too damp, and the sausages Mira brought were already warm. That first night I didn't sleep well. The ground was hard and the lake smelled weird, like copper and mold. I chalked it up to fish or algae. Around 3 a.m. I sat up to pee and noticed something in the trees. I couldn't make it out, just a shape standing too far to be clear. It didn't move, didn't make noise. I figured my eyes were playing with the dark. The next morning, Ray found something behind the tent. An animal, or what was left of one. Its guts were out, all tangled in weeds and branches. No head and no real shape left to identify what it had been. He laughed it off at first, but his hands were shaking when he picked up a stick to poke it. The ribs had been pulled apart, like someone had snapped them with bare hands. We dragged the thing away and dumped it closer to the water. Aaron said we should leave, that it didn't feel right. Mira told him he was being dramatic. I just stood there staring at the lake. The water didn't ripple, didn't reflect the sun properly. It just looked flat, like it was waiting for something. That night we stayed closer to the fire. No one said it, but the laughter had died off. We drank less, and we kept turning to look at the woods. They weren't loud or full of movement like normal forests. They just stood there, like a wall of eyes. It felt like the trees weren't just around us, they were watching. We zipped the tent all the way up. Ray kept a pocket knife in his sleeping bag. Aaron held onto his flashlight like it was a gun. I lay in the corner trying not to breathe too loud. Somewhere past midnight, we heard something outside. It wasn't walking, it was dragging. Slow, deliberate. Then it stopped right by the tent. I opened my eyes but didn't move. I could hear breathing outside the tent, heavy and irregular. Then a hand, or something shaped like a hand, pressed against the fabric right by Aaron's side. The fingers were long and crooked. They pushed hard, then pulled away. A second later, the flashlight flickered. That was when I realized Aaron wasn't breathing. I turned my head, heart pounding. Aaron was lying too still. His face was pale, his eyes wide open. His neck was torn on one side. I don't know how I didn't hear it happen. There was barely any blood at first, just a slow leak soaking into his sleeping bag. It was like whatever did it didn't want to wake the rest of us. Then I heard a low sound, like skin sliding against wet fabric. The zipper started moving. It didn't open fast. It moved like someone wanted us to know they were coming in. That sound was worse than a scream. I wanted to yell, to kick, to crawl away, but I couldn't. I just stared as the flap opened. The thing that came in wasn't human. It stood on two legs, but they were too long, bent the wrong way at the knees. Its skin looked dry and pale, cracked like old meat left in the sun. No eyes, just deep slits where they should have been. Its mouth hung open, showing layers of sharp, irregular teeth. It sniffed the air and leaned closer to Mira. She woke up and started screaming. Ray jumped forward, yelling her name, trying to push the thing back. It barely reacted. It grabbed him by the head and slammed him into the tent pole with one fluid motion. I heard the crack, sharp and wet. Ray collapsed with blood pouring from his nose and ears. He didn't move again. Mira crawled back, kicking wildly. The thing grabbed her ankle and pulled her out of the tent like she weighed nothing. Her screams were cut off as soon as it bit her neck. It didn't kill her fast. I could still hear her making choking noises while it chewed. I stayed where I was, heart racing, trying to disappear. I finally moved when it dragged her body out of view. I crawled through the side of the tent, slicing my arm on the torn fabric. I didn't look back. I just ran into the woods barefoot, bleeding and shaking. The forest didn't help me. Every step felt wrong. Every branch clawed at my skin. I didn't know where I was going. I just moved until my legs gave out. That's when I saw the tree. It was thick and tall with a few low branches strong enough to hold my weight. I climbed without thinking, tearing my palms open on the bark. I pulled myself up until I couldn't anymore and sat on a branch wide enough to not break. From the top, I could still see the camp in the distance. The tent was torn open completely, the fire out, everything dark. Ray's body was half in the tent, one arm bent at an unnatural angle. I couldn't see Mira, but I knew where she was. Then I heard it again, that dragging sound. Something was moving through the woods, slower now, like it was searching. I clung to the branch, barely breathing. It moved below me, sniffing, silent. I didn't see it, but I could feel it. The branches rustled slightly, not enough to be wind. Then it stopped. Minutes passed, maybe hours. I couldn't tell. I stayed frozen, muscles locked. I didn't know if it was still there. Every second I imagined it climbing the tree or waiting under me, mouth open, eyes I couldn't see locked on my legs. I pissed myself at some point. I didn't care. I didn't move until the sky changed. Eventually, the sun started to rise, slow and weak. The forest didn't come back to life. No birds, no wind, no signs of day. But the light helped. It made me believe I had a chance. I climbed down slowly. Hours passed before I reached the road. There was no traffic. I walked until I collapsed near a gas station several miles out. The clerk saw me, ran out, called the police. I didn't say much, just that there had been an accident. I gave them the wrong location on purpose. They found the bodies 3 days later, torn apart, scattered. They blamed a bear, maybe a wolf. Nothing stolen, no tracks, just carnage. They didn't know what to make of it. I spent a week in the hospital. They asked questions I refused to answer. I told them I didn't remember. They ran tests, said I had trauma, maybe shock-induced memory loss. I nodded and kept quiet. I could have told them the truth, but they wouldn't believe me. And even if they did, what good would it do? They'd either call me insane or accuse me of something worse. I saw how they looked at me. The survivor, the lucky one, or maybe the one who snapped. Some nights I wake up still hearing that zipper sound. I sleep with a knife now, even if I know it wouldn't help. I never go into the woods. I don't even walk near trees at night. I don't tell people what I saw. I don't need to. This story is based on a real unsolved case that occurred at Lake Bodom in Finland, where more than 20 teenagers were found brutally murdered while camping in different areas near the lake. The victims were brutally attacked by something that looked like claws, likely while they were asleep inside their tent. The attack was so sudden and violent that investigators believed it was an animal. Over the years, police received hundreds of tips, interrogated several suspects, and even reopened the case decades later with new forensic techniques, but never found a suspect.